Hey everyone, in this episode of the Well Aware podcast, we're going to introduce Reuben Swartz of Mimiran. Mimiran is the anti-CRM, which, if you'll learn from this episode, Ruben likes to describe as the tool designed not for enterprise software brought to the small and medium-sized business world, but rather built by a solopreneur consultant for other solopreneur consultants. I absolutely love the way Ruben thinks and how he approaches relationship management. The fact that he reaches out to me on a week-to-week basis with his emails, which are structured in such a way that, yes, they're templatized and automated, but they're conversation starters and they're ways of keeping in touch with him. Tying in who he is as a person and how he relates to other folks, I think he demonstrates such a perfect complement of what you should expect out of someone who is both using a CRM to manage relationships at scale, but also is coming across as a personalized one-on-one individual in the realm of being a consultant or just an overall good relationship professional resource, however you want to describe it. So with that, I look forward to you enjoying the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Well Aware podcast. Today, I'm with Reuben Swartz of Mimiran. Ruben, so grateful to have you here today.
Conrad, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Folks, today is going to be a very special journey into the realm of customer relationship management, or as we all like to know it, CRM systems. We're going to look at what Ruben has created within the realm of CRMs for consultants. If anything, Ruben, you have an interesting sort of marketing spin on this. You have sort of an anti-approach to like typical CRM contexts. Could you get a little more into that? Like, what is Mimiran to you?
Yeah, I think everybody who is in business needs to keep track of clients and prospects and partners and when you need to follow up with people and so on. And generally what we think of is, oh, that means I need a CRM, whether it's a stack of note cards or a notebook or a whiteboard or a spreadsheet or a Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever it might be. And I've tried all of those and dozens more. And what often happens is we get really excited about having sort of the right tool. We check the box, oh, I have a CRM. Now I'll be able to do all those things and not be stressed out about it. And what tends to happen, and I know from a lot of personal experiences, like, oh my gosh, for a week, everything seems great. And then you realize that I am working for this tool instead of the tool is working for me. And what became obvious to me years later, and I won't bore you with the whole story, but traditionally a CRM is built not for a consultant to manage follow-ups and create nurture relationship. It is built for the VP of sales to keep track of a sales team. That's where the original CRM tools came from. That's kind of what they're all designed to do. And I realized that part of the reason that I and so many people in this independent consulting tribe really struggle with them was because we were using a tool built for someone else to do a different thing. Like it said CRM on the box, but we didn't want to keep track of a sales team. We don't have a sales. We're not even a salesperson. We don't do sales full time. We don't really like selling. We don't like marketing, but we have to do all this stuff in a way that keeps us organized. And one of my customers actually said to me, hey, Ruben, this isn't really a CRM. It's kind of like an anti-CRM. Like it's not like those big enterprise tools. I like to think of it as like the Salesforce is a space shuttle and HubSpot is like a 747. And you have various other sort of jetliner tools that are really powerful and really cool if you need to go across an ocean or get into orbit or something like that. But if you just need to go to the store and you don't want to walk there and carry all the stuff back, you need a truck. And that's kind of where Mimiran comes in.
I'm laughing because I am now picturing what a 747 might look like if I took it down the street to go grocery shopping. Just the fuel costs alone are absurd. And granted, a lot of these CRM systems to your point, these enterprise focused CRM systems are pretty expensive, despite the fact that they've tried to enter into the small to medium sized business market by creating these free and starter plans. But I agree, they weren't built for the small and medium sized business inherently. They're kind of coming in, trying to adopt into that market arena. Some successfully, others with a bit of challenge. It kind of depends on who is coming into that world or who's sort of coming from that corporate side and bringing that with them these CRM systems into the small and medium sized space. Ruben, you're not alone in creating CRMs or anti-CRMs that kind of define this different styled nature of approaching relationship management from a more personalized, non-salesy, non-marketing kind of way, given where those particular departments meet people traditionally. But with that being said, you yourself, I think it's one thing to say that your tool does it. You yourself, I love your email. I love just your general approach as a human being now that we've connected. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that seems to fall in line heavily with your philosophy on the anti-CRM system.
Thanks, Conrad. I really appreciate those kind words. And it's kind of like all part of my mission. And one thing I just want to call attention to that you said earlier, there's a difference between a small and medium business and a large business, right? And you're saying some of these big enterprise tools, they have small and mid-sized editions, if you will. And whether or not those are the right tools, it is sort of like going from a 747 to a 737 to a Gulfstream or whatever. It is a difference in flavor, but it's the same kind of thing. You still have a sales team and a sales leader who needs to keep track of the sales team. There is a totally different, just total difference between that and a solo consultant who is doing sales and marketing in his or her spare time, right? It is not a degree of slightly different. It's not a matter of slightly different degree. It's a totally different thing. Like we might call it the same thing, like conversations, lead, deals, blah, 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 blah. But that's totally different. And I want to be very clear that I'm very focused on that solo person, right? Not the small business owner with a 5-person sales team. They need a lightweight version of a traditional CRM. I'm here because I spent years, ironically enough, as a sales and marketing consultant, helping some of the largest companies in the world with giant sales teams and big, complicated enterprise systems do sales and marketing more effectively. And I think like a lot of consultants, I could do a great job for my clients. I felt good about it. We got good word of mouth and we got repeat business and so on, which was great because I'm really crappy at my own sales and marketing. And there's a lot of consultants who are sort of like, well, I'm an accountant or I do web design or something. And so it makes sense that they would be crappy at sales and marketing. I really did feel like I had a good excuse. So I thought, well, I'm getting paid to sit in the room with some of the top sales and marketing people in the world. Let me just take good notes and do what they do. And of course, that was a total disaster. And I realized later, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, like there's a difference between how do I optimize this giant enterprise versus how do I go about my day-to-day life, which is mostly about doing client work, but has to involve quote unquote sales and marketing to actually bring in the clients. And I think so many of us get stuck in the way I did, thinking, okay, gosh, I'm not really a sales and marketing person. What do I do? Okay, well, let me go into the sales and marketing industrial complex and get a fancy CRM and learn how to do sales. And I had a shelf full of sales books and all the stuff that, right, I was part of the sales and marketing industrial complex. But what works well for that Fortune 500 company with the 5,000 person sales team, the multi-billion-dollar marketing budget, et cetera, where at the leadership level, by necessity, everything is reduced to a number, is so different than what it's like for you as a consultant, or even what it's like for an individual sales rep in that organization, right? Where the relationships are the real thing that matters. And I realized that I had spent all this time and energy and money trying to train myself to be like these big organizations that, one, it was not an appropriate fit business wise, and it was definitely not an appropriate fit for me as a human being. Like that's just not how I want to roll. I like math and all that, and the math doesn't lie, but I don't want to treat my relationships as numbers. I want to find cool people to have good conversations with. And I realized eventually that I was not alone in this. There are so many people, and there's more and more folks who are leaving the corporate world voluntarily or involuntarily, and they're trying to start a business around the thing that they were good at in the corporate world. And they end up in this situation that I ended up in, like, oh, wait, hold on, that I don't have any referrals this month. What the heck do I do? And so my mission is really to help these folks make their dent in the universe, if you will, and do it in a way that allows them to remain true to who they are, which is typically someone who wants to go help and serve others, but do it in a way that's efficient and effective and let them create a real business around that, as opposed to, oh gosh, I'm praying for a referral this month. So the software, the emails, the podcast, all the stuff is all in service of that mission.
Ruben, let's get tactical. Love the good app. And I want to say that in your realm of thinking, to your point, right, in sort of a contrast to the sales and marketing industrial complex, you have your own version of the day-to-day workflows that are meant to allow people to learn more about you, get educated, and overall want to connect with you. Can you walk through some of those workflows? Can you walk through how Mimiran provides the support? Because at the end of the day, every workflow takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. how does your system help enable some of these workflows to be performed more efficiently and more effectively?
I'm happy to talk to it. Do you want me to open up a screen share and literally walk through it?
Absolutely.
All right, let me
I
do
am a
that.
show and teller.
Let me find out how I can share my screen here in Riverside, which I think is fairly easy.
There is a share button.
All right, here, green. All right. So hopefully we're now looking at a list of client tasks.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And just if I may, I would love for us to kind of communicate as audio visually as possible as to like what we're seeing here, because there's going to be some audience members who may just be listening only. We're going to kind of give them an audible
Sure,
tour of what they're seeing, just for context.
sure.
I'll
So
I'll jump in wherever you may kind of come in with the inherent bias of like you live here. I'm a bit of a stranger in
right.
a strange land, but hey, let's do it.
All right, sounds good. Well, so many CRMs and other tools have this notion of tagging, which lets you sort of assign one or more categories or groupings to people or anything else. And Mimiran has tagged, but it takes it to another level because what do we want to do? We want to put people in these buckets, if you will, but to some extent, we want that to define how often we should be speaking to them and kind of what things we need to do. And maybe to step back for a second, I think if you are in a relationship business like consulting, you are in a conversation business, and I'm a techie, I'm an introvert, I don't like selling. So I was really good at using technology to kind of get out of talking to people instead of using it as a way to facilitate great conversations with the right people. So if you're in this conversation business, I think you have a two-step sales process, which is one, figure out exactly who you want to talk to, and two, talk to them. It's really that simple. And if you're doing those things, there's a lot of nuance to doing them really well and so on. I don't want to make it sound like it's trivial, but if you're doing those things, good things are going to happen and you're going to be in a virtuous cycle. And usually what happens is we fall out of doing those things or we never really get to doing those things. That's when we struggle. So everything we're seeing in Mimiran is about how do we make that happen? And so part of it is, well, we're using tags to kind of figure out, well, exactly who are the folks that we really want to talk to? How often do we want to talk to them? It's not just about having one conversation. It's about a relationship made up of multiple conversations. And traditional CRM, the default is you talk to someone great. And if you don't manually enter something in to talk to them again, you're not going to talk to them again. I can't tell you how many times I had a situation where I had a great conversation and I was pretty good about putting in that next task date. But every once in a while you're at lunch or you just have too many tabs open or you just forget and you don't, and that person just poof and they disappear. So the idea with Mimiran is I might want to do these things on a recurring basis. So maybe I want to talk to my client every 30 days, for example. And I might also want to do some things beyond just have conversations. So I can define a set of tasks to go with that client tag. So when I tag them, I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm going to send an invoice. I'm going to have Susan send an invoice. Maybe Susan is a member of your team who handles some of the contractual stuff. And then I'm going to send a thank you card within a day. I'm going to connect on LinkedIn. I'm going to ask for a referral. And I'm going to have Susan reach out about the contract renewal conversation in 300 days. And the idea is it's not actually automating this for me. These are all things that a person has to do. It's just trying to keep track of them and make it easier. And I
But
can,
you do automate the task creation and documentation in and of itself. Like, I do not want to disallow that justice from you because this is really important. And this is one of
yes,
those things where making sure that the task exists is part of the definition of done itself. It may be the definition of doing because it's not
right.
necessarily done. It's just, documented. But I give this a lot of credit just on its own. So for everyone who's not being able to see the screen here, there was clearly, like in the page prior, Ruben, you were showing just, and I actually want to dive into this particular segment as well, because I think there's something to be said about like what's the meta behind how you classify and categorize those tags.
hmm
I think there's something to be said about, everyone starts to get really, unclear about what their operation should be like in terms of the frequency in which they meet with someone, the nature of the tasks themselves that they're going to be performing every X number of days for that particular for that particular relationship in that category. So I want to circle back on that when we get the chance. But needless to say, here we're sort of seeing this sort of 30-day breakdown of like, these are the things that you do every 30 days to kind of check the boxes with your existing clients. And it's all
Right.
created for you. The tasks themselves are created for you. Someone's got to do them, but hey, you're halfway done.
Right. At least you know that it's there, and you're not sort of lying awake at night wondering, did I remember to note that I have that task? And did I assign it to Susan? So let's say that Susan's on your team and she's going to handle some of these finance tasks. I can say, okay, all of those tasks are going to go to her. And meanwhile, these tasks here, send a thank you card, connect on LinkedIn, et cetera, there's no user defined, which means it's going to be defined by whoever has the contact relationship, i.e. the consultant. And then I can do some other things to help me stay organized. And I don't know if I'd say it lets you buy back time, but it's going to let you get more done with less flailing around. So maybe I should say that you're going to actually get some time back. Say I want to dive into this finance category. I can see all my finance tasks, and I can even go to the calendar button here and say, okay, every Tuesday morning, I'm going to do my finance tasks. And then it's going to give me a link to drop right into here. So I can see, okay, here's my queue of this particular category of tasks. Because a lot of times it makes us kind of queue up similar types of tasks, and I can just bang them out and not have to worry about it. I don't have to be jumping from one app to another. Did I remember to go into QuickBooks to send the invoice? Did I remember to go to LinkedIn and connect with them, et cetera? Everything is there, and it's just like, it's kind of like, it makes it dumb busy work as opposed to frantic. I hope I remembered that ad hoc work, because I really want to invest my energy and my sort of mental alertness in the actual relationships and the actual work, not the million other things that have to get done either by me or by VA or whomever, but that they really shouldn't be like occupying a whole bunch of my cerebral cortex.
I want to highlight that to your design, every task involving organization of oneself is a task. And if that can be delegated, you've won me over, right? I also want to say that what you're highlighting here is in my worldview, what we like to call awareness management. So like one being able to keep on top of everything they need to be aware of. You've just highlighted very quickly on screen the integration between most people's time management systems, which is their calendar, which is their scheduler, which is that whole, whether it's Google or Outlook, what have you, right? iCal, you showed off that all those integrations are accounted for here. You've associated that time management system with the action management system that you have, everyone's to-do list or note-taking. You kind of highlighted all the different sort of alternative pen and paper systems that most people work through in order to kind of organize, again, what do they have to do today, tomorrow, all these days? And again, that relationship between all the things that are on their to-do list, how that shows up on their time management system is really important. But again, going back to Mimiran's inherent design as let's maybe even take a step away from the CRM component. Let's cut the C off and just call it a relationship management system.
Oh, right? I love that.
That to me is the business of what you've just described, is like my relationship management system based on how my relationships are managed and the workflows that I have for that creates this action management workflow. And this action management workflow attaches to my time management workflow. And I live on my time. If it's not on my calendar, It doesn't exist. So I go from my time to my actions, but I know that based on performing my actions, there's context that's being generated for the relationships. And that's is exactly the information management ecosystem that we're looking for here for pretty much everybody. Like, everyone lives on time, relationships, and actions. There's a couple extra things that we do here on my side, but this is a great start.
Thanks, Conrad. I appreciate that. And a couple other things that I think you might appreciate. If we have a link, for example, maybe this is going to be a link to QuickBooks. It doesn't do that for me. Like I said, it's not automation, it's organization, but it's like, okay, all I have to do is click here to go perform that task.
It's auto designation.
There you go. See, you've got all these great terms for this stuff. I love this. I'm learning a lot. And hey, in fact, if I have
this is the game, right?
Like, let's say that, notice this one task, this invoice is actually sent to somebody else, for the actual user of the system, not a VA. Maybe for some reason, this invoice for Jacob is like a big mess. I don't know why, but we have a separate calendar entry here. So I could even say, hey, this is something that I need to work on tomorrow at lunch or this
You can
evening or something like that,
individually time manage this
if
action.
necessary, right? Like, so some of them, hopefully you don't have to do that with all of them, but every once in a while, there's going to be a time that you're like, oh crap, I really need an hour for just this one thing. And if I don't block it out, it's never going to get done. So let me do that.
Mm. This brings me to the concept of in our system we use Notion currently to kind of give ourselves a track of everything that we're doing. And one of the things that you've now just given me context toward is like, it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to put together a block of calendar time that is going to reflect a batch of action.
Mm.
And that batch of actions reflects a specific category, specific, sub-selection of things. It's not everything on my list. It's just this section of things on my list. Okay, cool. That makes sense. Versus if I have a time block dedicated to one specific action item, because that action item is particularly intensive, or it just requires its own standalone report. At the end of the
Right.
day, to me, every block on my calendar is a record of report worthiness. And so it depends on how I want to go about spending an alternative dedication of time that I have, which is to sort of retrospecting and reviewing how I went about my day, that I can then say, okay, look, for that particular time block, like I've got some piece to contend with. And so I'm going to
Right.
put together my sort of knowledge of what happened during that time, and what I'm going to need to take away from for the future. Even if that, not to say that the data itself is what's relevant, it's the action of entering that data that becomes, the process of retrospection, not the actual result of whatever it is you produce during that retrospection that matters sometimes.
Right. Or even if I've got a VA, right, maybe it's like, yeah, typically on Fridays, my VA does my finance stuff, but this Friday, I really want to make sure that we get the Lubowitz invoice out.
Yeah, now you can guarantee certain actions are going to be performed just based on the fact that they're put in that much more. They have that much more solidarity on the time bookkeeping system, if you will, on the calendar, on the schedule.
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. What else do we
Now,
have, Ruben?
well, I mentioned earlier this notion of let's figure out exactly who we want to talk to and let's talk to them. So I think a lot of times consultants struggle because they don't know exactly who they want to talk to. So they end up kind of getting a bunch of, oh, you do websites or you do this or that. Here's this referral. And it's kind of like, okay, it turns out that I'm trying to convince someone to take a 747 at the grocery store kind of situation. And then you're selling and it's painful and then they don't want to buy, or if they do, they object to everything, or if they actually sign, then they become a nightmare client, et cetera. So the more specific we can get, the easier we make everything for ourselves. And so Mimiran, as far as I know, is the only CRM that has this mission and positioning screen, which asks us to lay out, kind of just play a little Mad Lib for people who are just listening along. It's Mad Lib. Who's your ideal client? What attributes do they have? And it asks you for 3 different attributes that people say things like, my ideal client is all business owners. And you're like, okay, well, that's like a gazillion people. That doesn't help yet. What about them? Oh, well, maybe they are, they own a manufacturing business with a certain type of machine, and they are trying to expand to a different country, or whatever it is that it's like, oh, those are the people who are absolutely ideal. Doesn't mean you have to work with only them. You can accept clients who are outside of that exact definition, but we want to like define the market of the people who are in that market. You are like the 800-pound gorilla. You are the obvious choice for them. You go through this little Mad Lib tool. What are their attributes? What's the big pain you help them deal with? What's the impact or cost of that pain? What's the traditional approach that they've probably tried already and why didn't it work? What's your unique approach and what's the benefit of that? What's your superhero name and what's your origin story? And some people can run through this and just fill it in. And some people are going to have a hard time really getting the details right, or they'll know some answers and not others. And so I always recommend, well, go talk to your favorite clients, and you can click on this other tab on this screen where basically we use the same words in a different order with different connections. Say, well, here's a client success story. What would a client say about their struggle and how you helped them, what hadn't worked and so on, and why it was better for them after they worked with you? Does your homepage reflect this? What about your lead magnet? What about ideas for talking to people? Social media profiles and posts, and even just a whole content calendar all around this ideal client profile, what you do for them. And the more we can dial this in, the more everything else starts to become easier. It's like this positioning I like to think of it as a lever. And a lot of folks are using the lever the wrong way. So they're actually making it harder for themselves. And when you're an independent consultant, the last thing you want to do is make sales and marketing harder for yourself. And unfortunately, I've done that a bunch, so I know all about it. We really want to use that lever to make things easier for us. So it almost doesn't feel like we're working that hard at sales and marketing. If we do a great job, then a compelling lead magnet is going to kind of come out of this. And we can use that to attract people via social media, via partners, et cetera, via referrals. And then a lot of us neglect the people we already know. So of course, at CRM, we have this list of contacts in it. And as we were talking about before, we can tag them and we can assign tasks and so on to these people. But the other thing that I think is really important is because we're in a conversation business, conversations are sort of like a different, they're their own task, if you will, maybe beyond a task. So every contact has a field for when did I last have a conversation and what am I next due for a conversation? And as we talked about before, I can manually set those next conversation dates if I want to, but the tags allow me to have a sensible default. So if I don't do something manually, the default is I'm going to keep having conversations with people on a certain cadence versus they're just going to disappear. Because what happens a lot of times is we don't follow up with people very well. And then we say, oh gosh, I need more leads. And you go network or you spend a bunch of money on website or whatever it is, you get more people in that you don't follow up on and the pattern repeats.
Constantly going, skimming the top of the funnel. Yeah. Very wasteful behavior.
Very wasteful. And it's also very unsatisfying because most of the folks who are doing this, they don't want to be in that like, oh, I got a bunch of leads. Let me go close them. Like that doesn't really fit with how they think and how they operate in the world. They would rather nurture the relationships. And obviously you can't have infinite conversations with infinite people. You have to get very specific about it or you're just not going to have enough time, which is where the first part comes in, right? Getting very specific about who you want to talk to. So let's say I want to spend some time following up with my prospect. I'm clicking on that prospect tag so I can zoom my contact list into just my prospects. And again, I have this calendar button here and I can use this to say, okay, let me make sure that I'm prospecting on a recurring basis. I'm following up with the contacts marked prospect. And when I get that alert, it's going to take me back to the screen and I can click start call mode and it's going to take me to the first prospect that I'm due to talk to. And of course, in this case, I don't have a phone number, so it's not all that interesting, but I do have a calendar link for them because it was lit up in green. So let's say I jump over there and I set a next conversation date for Thursday. So if I hit save, it's going to set that next conversation date for Thursday and then take me to the next contact and so on and so forth. Let's say that now I go to someone who actually has a phone number. So I can click here to make the call and I can add notes and I can also see some things that you don't typically see in a CRM. I can see who actually referred me to Emmanuel Christensen. I can see any referrals that this person has made. I can even see here their ideal client and their ideal partner. So if I have people that I want to introduce them to, it's easier for me to find and search across my contact list. Oh, you really need to talk to so-and-so.
So just as a recap here, because you're highlighting two things here. So number one, I love the missioning and positioning. I think that as a feature within the CRM system itself is delightful because otherwise you would probably pay top dollar for a brand story designer or a marketing strategist who's going to sit down with you and go, who is your target audience? Who is your ICP? How are you approaching them in the marketplace? What type of content are you creating to highlight your skills and expertise and the client successes that you had? Like all of that is a copywriting marketing strategy like workflow. It's an operation. It's an operation to create such strategy, right? And create such branding of yourself. And then that gets reflected everywhere, as you highlighted, right? On your website and all that. So your Mad Libs approach just says, cool, I've templatized that whole operation of creating a strategy into a very simple system. Just fill out the words, take inspiration from the examples. And now you're going to use that to drive the rest of your processing. I find that in my worldview, it doesn't, a good strategist will provide all of that, but then they also need to step in and say, okay, well, by the way, what is your actual fundamental tactic around once you've got that strategy in place, what is the operation? What is the relationship management operation? Like people say, what's the marketing operation? I'm like, what's the relationship management operation that reflects your marketing in terms of you creating content, in terms of you reaching out and connecting with folks? Like, yes, you know who you're targeting and you know what you're targeting them about, why you want to talk to them in particular. But then how do you go about doing that? Like, what is the actual day-to-day influence? And you're presenting through this tool, you're presenting like, here are all the key functions that you would want to engage with. And here's how it's organized for you so that it's just a couple of clicks, right? You kind of have to familiarize yourself with that. But once you know, like, yeah, part of your day-to-day job is making phone calls, asking people how they're doing, seeing how you can be of help to them. So being
Yep.
not just speculative as a seller, but also speculative as a partner, which is one of my favorite
Right.
things to do, or even being speculative as a buyer, depending on what the context is around that. But, and then just to kind of highlight here, just for the folks who are not watching here, on the left-hand side of this sort of screen that is basically just like, it's an action management page again, where every prospect activity here is just, once you're done with it, you hit save, you move on to the next one, right? It just becomes a very streamlined, fully focused, just do one task at a time kind of deal, which should work for every single type of person who's performing rote tasks, right? You're going to have to just go through this process. Just don't distract yourself. Just get through the batch, right? But then on the left-hand side, in this small little section of the different properties that you have associated, you mentioned refer, you mentioned networking asks and networking groups. To me, this kind of falls in line with another side of good marketing strategy, which is obviously thanking every relationship who's ever helped you. To me, that's a very classic strategy, and it's a very simple tactic at the end of the day. Susan, thank you for introducing me to so-and-so. But then at the same time, you also have what does it mean to be a good partner, and what does partnership as an operation look like? What is the tactic on a day-to-day basis? And you highlighted just on here, there is an operation of knowing what your partner / prospect / client / whoever it is that you're dealing with, new relationship, what are they looking for? What do they need help with? To me, this falls into this sort of broader ecosystem of like, if we didn't have these massive, again, mostly enterprise level marketing and sales engines that this whole industrial complex is working here, we would all be helping each other find and close business. We are our sales engine, right? When we're working together, we call these referral partners, but I think we get caught up in the sense of like, everyone's your referral partner as soon as they hand you an introduction that's worth your time. And so you're trying to generate that opportunity. Yeah, exactly. And of course, then we get all these different influences around, what does it mean to have a good barter relationship with these partners versus what does it mean to have a more transactional liquid capital exchange, and how that plays out in the fact that, we've stopped trading chickens for horseshoes and we have currency. But people have their thoughts. Anyway, I want to highlight that because I think there's a back end sense of like what you need to know about good partnership and sales operations strategy to know how this tool is working for you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. And just to call attention to some more calendar buttons, because I think you're going to have some interesting thoughts on this. I mentioned earlier that sometimes you have a link. If you have the link to their scheduling link, you can store that in here so you never have to go looking for it again. In this case, we don't have their scheduling link, but I can invite them to a meeting on my calendar. And I can also block out time to do something for this particular contact. Like maybe I have to go do a little bit of research, or I have to create a proposal for them, or I have to perform actual client work for them. It just makes it that much easier to block off that time in the calendar to make sure that gets done.
And I know we alluded to this earlier, but this part of me is kind of going back to the whole idea of like, Ruben, this is great. We got to do this work, but all of it ourselves, right? So you highlight that there are user team actions involved in here as well, meaning you don't have to be the one who self-assigns everything. How do these particular functions work? Because I do this very similarly myself. When I go and kind of record keep all my time events, one of the things that I have is that I've set up is like this ability to quick action other team members to perform certain relationship research tasks, relationship networking tasks, relationship speculating tasks, and so on.
And I can even do that here. I can click this new task button and create a task. Let's just say research web copy. I'm just making something up. And again, we can give it a category, which helps us kind of fit it into an existing queue. And we can give it a URL if we want. In fact, we can even use some of these merge fields to make that even easier. but let's just say their website is, we're going to call it ESPN.com just for fun, right? And then I can say, well, who's going to be responsible for this? Well, maybe all my web stuff goes to Mark, for example, and that might be my VA, it might be my partner, it might be whomever. And now I've got that all set up.
My call to action around this for everyone who has these sort of recurring, and you'll notice them if anyone performs an audit, especially as a consultant, knowing these sort of rote workflows that you do in terms of researching certain activities or certain things about people, the more you can templatize these action items, the more you can very swiftly identify that when they need to occur, you're just going to assign a specific person to get help with you on that. Or you can do it yourself. And again, to your point, Ruben, at the end of the day, the biggest freedom in most people's realms is to compartmentalize and batch actions according to certain types of categorizations, right?
Right.
Don't make your brain have to context switch.
Exactly. So this, we talked earlier about the tasks associated when I tag someone as a client. I might have a set of tasks that I automatically create when I tag someone as a prospect as well. And some of those might go to me, some of them might go to Susan. But like you said, I can have those defaults just get created for me. And maybe in some cases, they're not going to apply. Oh, I'm already connected on LinkedIn. Okay, fine. I'll just delete that task. It's already done. I don't even need to show that I did it, but I don't have to think about it. I want to use my precious limited brain power on the stuff that actually matters.
Yeah. No, this is the definition of allowing a system to organize and execute action items with you, for you, whether that's through other parties that ultimately complete the definition of done. But again, the definition of done includes documented. And that is such I think that is such a well misplaced in terms of like what the value of that is. I think that's where a lot of us kind of get caught up in like, okay, well, the system is documenting all these things for me, but it's not doing it. I'm like, yeah, well, documenting is a lot of work. And if you don't document it, how can you retrospect? If you don't document it, how can you remember? Or how many, I think this gets into this really weird awareness problem of like, you almost find yourself only in certain instances realizing what you don't know you forgot.
Yeah, that's right. What do you not know that you don't know? That's the thing that really kills you.
Okay. Forgive me. Please continue.
So
back in
thanks.
Prospecting mode. We're going through this day-to-day option of, kind of generating what are our notes for a given prospect. It's sort of like, if you would call this relationship management task, like literally like definition relationship management. You're going through your list of relationships and what you need to do for each of them. And this becomes just a batch action.
Yeah. And the idea is if I have, say, one prospect, even if I'm trying to serve them like a doctor, there's going to be some part of me, even subconsciously, that's going to be like, oh man, I need to somehow turn this person into a client, right? And then it becomes a sales call, which I don't really like, because then I'm trying to convince them to do something for me as opposed to helping them do what they want to do. So part of the challenge there is, especially when you feel like, gosh, I don't like selling, you kind of retreat and you only do it when absolutely necessary. And that's exactly when you turn it into that thing that you want to avoid versus, hey, I'm just going to talk to the people who are kind of in my world, who have maybe expressed interest by grabbing a lead magnet, or they've got a referral, or I've known them from wherever. And we're just going to have conversation. And the right people, because I'm very focused about who I am and what I do and who I help and so on, the right people are going to be attracted to that. And at the right time, they're going to raise their hand and say, hey, what is it like to work with you? I need help.
Right. This is buyer-led business, right?
Right. No one wants to be sold. Everyone wants to buy. And the irony is so many people spend so much energy trying to sell people, fighting objections and so on. And then when someone wants to buy, you inadvertently put all these hurdles in their way and make it hard for them.
Yep. Call it an important process of unlearning.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we need to, I can show you tons of fun features and we probably have a bunch of cool conversations about it. And I'm very happy to do that, but I didn't necessarily think that we have to do that the whole time.
Ruben, I think your latest point, again, that kind of goes back to, what should the philosophy be about relationship management? I think there's a lot to be said about where people need to know both. There's three layers. There's almost like, what is your culture of marketing and sales? Then what is your strategy based on said culture? And then finally, what is the actual operation? What are the day-to-day things? And if you want to go one step further, what are the systems and SOPs that are going to help facilitate those day-to-day operations such that you aren't the one man or one woman army kind of handling and addressing everything, right? You want to be well provisioned. So again, like I think this is where I find like the business for you, Ruben, of having an CRM of what Mimiran is. The fact that it is a product, it is a system and an SOP in a nutshell for this operation. But then you yourself also, again, through your content, through your outreach, through just the way you go about talking about this, you then start to introduce some of the strategy, some of the cultural philosophy around what does it mean to be a solopreneur consultant who's going out into the marketplace and just offering value. Again, not in the context of sales, but in the context of sometimes it's partnership. Sometimes it's just, checking in and being a good relationship and just showing what it means to catch up and check in with everybody. I think that's an operation that a lot of people go like, it comes at a cost and I don't know when I can afford it because I have all these other things I have to do. And at the end of the day, I have to make money. That's kind of where people, I think, really get stuck in that survival aspect. And it's totally fair at the very beginning stages. And you can always come back to it, especially if you're falling into a feast and famine approach. Like there's so much that we're not alluding to here about like, what are the actual problems that people tend to face day to day, but therein lies the rub. The solution is right in front of you. Like check in with your relationships, have a good system and workflow for that. Have a good strategy by which you are talking to people that are important to you that you can help the most, because chances are when they need you, they'll come straight to you. Right. I like the gorilla analogy. And then last but not least, like just remember the culture that like be aware of the very culture that you wish to embody, but sort of struggle to fight with every time you resist it, which is don't sell. Like just be a good relationship, be helpful, provide value, and then let the buyers come through to you because you are out there. Not necessarily just build it and they will come, but build it, talk about it, be present, and then people will show up and ask for your help. And then serve them because at that point they need you.
That's absolutely right. And I think along those lines, there's certain things that you really have to do yourself and you should do yourself and you should embrace and be excited about it, because you're stripping out all the crap, or at least as much of the crap as possible, to kind of like weigh you down. You're like, oh man, why did I start my own business again? This sucks. And that energy will pervade everything versus like, hey, yeah, there's a little bit of crap I have to do, but overall my day's pretty fun. I get to go help people that I care about helping. And I have to do some to help me, deal with invoicing or some of that other stuff that I really don't need to do myself. And then another angle that is important is a lot of these independent consultants say, well, gosh, my website is really just a shingle to show that I exist and that I am a quote unquote business person. And I think that's a missed opportunity, one that I certainly, a mistake that I made for years. Your website, just like your virtual sales team, your partner network, it is a sales rep for you, not the end sales rep, but it should be a frontline sales rep that is working for you 24/7. And we mentioned earlier on the mission and positioning screen that you take that mission and positioning stuff and kind of feed that into the outline of a lead magnet. And I think a lot of folks, they take lead magnets and they do them wrong. Conceptually, they do them wrong technologically. And then they say, well, these don't really work. And what we really want to do is, I like to think of it as, we're not marketing, we're teaching. We are teaching our ideal client how to solve the problem we have to solve. We are basically trying to give it all away, be as helpful as possible. And the people who can grab that and say, hey, thanks, Conrad, I don't need to hire you anymore, they were not going to be a great client, right? Like that's just not how it works. Most likely they're going to say, oh gosh, this is really cool. I like the way Conrad thinks. Now I get it, especially if you can describe their problem better than they can. You're like, oh, that's the real issue. Now this guy knows what he's talking about. He's seen this hundreds of times before. For me, it's the first time. And then who do I want to turn to for help? Well, it's Conrad. And so Mimiran makes it easy to do that in a way that doesn't just send a PDF to somebody, which is sort of the traditional lead magnet. And it drives me nuts, because usually when I'm out there searching for solutions to my problem, and I'm trying to maybe give money to someone to help, and I get the PDF on my phone that I can't read, and I'm trying to pinch and zoom everywhere, it's a nightmare. And more than that, maybe the sales rep at whatever that company is got a notification, and maybe they try to call me in an hour or two or a day or 3 days later when I'm like completely forgotten who they are. The idea with Mimiran is, we've got these lead magnets that live online, and so they can display nicely on any device. We can put videos in there. We can put form fields in there so we can exchange information. And I'm going to know if and when somebody is reading that, even if they go back next week, next month. And so whether I'm the one who's going to do that follow-up, or maybe someone on your team is going to do that initial follow-up, because it doesn't have to be super complicated, but it's not a sales call. It's a conversation about the topic of the lead magnet, the thing that they really want to talk about, that they want help with, and that you love talking about. So if you say, gosh, what did you think of that? How does that compare with what you're doing? Where did you get stuck? Whatever, right? Like the stuff you would ask a friend in that situation versus, Glenn Ross is calling me on the phone because they've got to make the deal by midnight or whatever. That's not fun for either side, and it's not very effective.
I'm laughing because I just rewatched that movie.
It's a great movie, but it's a horrible way to live. And we don't have to live that way. We can do it a better way that is more in tune with how we want to walk through the world. And it's actually going to be a lot more effective for us. And I think so many consultants sort of have that Glenn Ross experience with some lead magnets. Maybe they requested from some big enterprise and they're like, that's not for me. Or they put something on their site and it doesn't really do a lot for them. But don't neglect that, because we want to have our website doing as much work for us as possible. And it's only got one job. That's to get us leads. And really what we mean by leads is not just an email address, but a conversation.
I like the lead magnet as a landing page, not as a standalone PDF that, as a result of, someone triggering it's the classic, like, give me your email so that I can, reach out to you later. Like that particular tactic has become so tired and tried at this point, because everyone knows, like, one, I'd rather give you a fake email address than the actual email address that I own, because I don't want to get banned by you. I don't know until I see the landing page or the lead magnet that I really actually care about the way you're solving my problem, right? My whole point of showcasing interest in your lead magnet is I don't know whether or not this thing can solve my problem, but I think it might. If it can, and I had a really good experience with that content, then I'm going to want to find a way to reach out to you and engage further and ask more questions, right? And see how far I could take this conversation into, really getting the most bang for my buck, or with buck being both time and or money, right? Because it's what kind of we're both trading these things at the end of the day. Ruben, this is this is the stuff that, every CRM system out there doesn't bring with it, right? Or I like to say, even HubSpot, right, does its justice of trying to be a thought leader in the space of what good marketing and sales operations look like. But at the end of the day, it's a flight manual for the 747, not the day-to-day.
HubSpot's a great tool, great company. I'm not disagreeing with anything they're saying. Just like you said, let's not try to take the 747 to the grocery store.
Ruben, how can people find you and contact you?
You can shoot me an email, Ruben@Mimiran.com, REUBEN@MIMIRAN.com. Tell them Conrad sent you. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Reuben Swartz on LinkedIn. You can find me on the Sales for Nerds podcast, or just go to the website, go to Mimiran.com. There's a bunch of helpful lead magnets for you there. Proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, questions to ask in a sales cycle, et cetera. There's a bunch of free resources, in addition, of course, to being able to sign up for free trial of the CRM.
Okay. Ruben, what is one final takeaway that you want to share with the audience?
I think people treat the relationships that they're very comfortable with totally different from quote unquote sales relationships. And I know I did this for years. And finally I realized, why can't I just talk to prospects, other people sort of in the business world, the same way I talk to my friends and acquaintances, right? Same attitude, same vibe. Doesn't mean I'm going to go help them move their couch or anything like that, but I can just show up without feeling awkward or nervous. They're just another person. And the more I can do with my positioning, with my partners, with my website, with all this other stuff to sort of like encourage the right people to come to me, and also encourage the people who would be better served elsewhere to go elsewhere, the more easy those conversations are going to be and the more fun I'm going to have. And if you had told me back in the day that sales and marketing is actually supposed to be fun, I would have thought you were insane. Like, I just thought it was a necessary evil. You just have to grind it out and be real focused and put your nose down and get it done. And what I realized is that's actually not correct. If you're doing it right, it's going to be generally a good time. And if you're feeling like, oh gosh, it's miserable, that's a red flag that you're not doing it right.
Folks, thank you for listening to this episode of the Wellware Podcast. I'm Conrad Ruiz. Ruben, thank you so much for the time. Until next time.
Thanks, Conrad.